Now that you have your base map kind of pulled together, there's lots of information that we can drop in here. We can go out and grab new GIS layers, export them in and drop them in with a legend, and provide lots of different information about downtown West Lafayette. It depends on the GIS sources you have available, but there's everything from population density and all of the census information we could drop in over the top of this map. In some communities, you can actually download traffic counts, so you can actually add kind of vehicles per hour information onto your roadways. Lots and lots of different information that exists out there. Zoning, building uses, all kinds of different things that we could bring in here. But it's also important just to remember that there are some simple things that we can actually use. You know, what are the quick and easy things? And some of these are just tips and pointers. Most of you have already done this. I can trust that you kind of carry this forward, but I want you to spend some time practicing. So one of the diagrams that we often pull together is just a simple circulation diagram. And so I can jump over to kind of a finished product and show that if we want to show a circulation diagram along State Street as a primary vehicle circulation and provide some secondary vehicle circulation points, you can do this pretty easily. Often this work gets done by people by going back into Illustrator at this point in time, because Illustrator is in many ways, as a vector-based program, better for drawing lines and arrows and that kind of thing. That's one option that certainly exists out there. And I think that the concern is that when you start drawing in Photoshop, that you can really quickly make it look bad, right? And so I can try and draw a primary circulation path, and that looks pretty awful. Well, I mean, there are some things that can help that out, and it can actually, I can make it look worse. Because if you don't have your smoothing tool on, you can see that, right, that it really looks bad when we're drawing in that way. Or if I turn that all the way up, you can see that Photoshop will actually follow a curve much better for you using the same basic motion. So for some of you, or if you're using a graphic tablet to insert this, you can actually just draw over the top of this, up the smoothing tool, and you can probably create those lines relatively quickly. Now, the other simple tools, just reminders, is that if I hold the shift key, I can go ahead and get a line that more or less traces from point to point to point, which generally is good enough for what we're attempting to show, right? Primary vehicular circulation. If I go ahead and change that over to multiply, I can even show everything else that's going on. Suddenly my street labels have, gotten lost a little bit, and so maybe I pull those up on top of, pull those up to the top. I'll have to deal with some other issues as well. I can go ahead and put an outer glow on those. So put some white around the edge so that you can actually still read them relatively well. I could use a stroke as well. Again, details. But one other thing that I think is interesting here is for circulation is to always remember that we do have the option, if we go ahead and open up our brush tool, so go to brush settings, we do have the option of actually changing the spacing. And so what do I mean by that? It means that you can draw dotted lines. Dotted lines do this curve much better, especially if we have our smoothing turned up. And so if I want to actually provide secondary circulation, I can start here and just generally follow Tapawingo Drive, come up the hill, right through the old building that used to exist there, back to the Harrison Street connection that exists. And generally, this is a pretty easy way to go ahead and get that drawing pulled together, right? You can create something really fast. I mean, circulation's is the easiest of the layers that we're generally working with, right? And so, that's one layer of information that you could consider putting onto your map. The other ones that I'd like you to take a stab at creating, though, are a little bit more involved in some cases. And so amongst those is the tree cover layer. And so real quick, I'm going to turn this off and go to tree cover. This is something that we often want to do as fast as we possibly can, right? Where's existing tree cover within an urban study area? Well, the aerial photograph is a wealth of information if we use it correctly. So what do I mean by using it correctly? Well, aerial photograph itself, there's lots of stuff laying on top of it right now. If I just go ahead and turn everything else off, you can see that there are definitely trees in here, and so I can go into the aerial photograph and I could go in and try and individually grab each tree, and away we go, right? You can see how that would take a lot of time and energy. So one of the things that I'd strongly recommend is go ahead and create a duplicate layer. I can turn off the original real quick, and then if we go in and make some adjustments to it, we can do simple adjustments like brightness and contrast. All right, and so if I really up the contrast, you're going to see that you can start to even change the colors of all the trees that are on here. Sometimes this is enough to go ahead and then grab most of the tree cover. You can hold the shift key and kind of make sure you're still getting any other pockets of tree cover that exist within the map. It's not going to be perfect, but it is what it is. Then I create a new layer, use my paint bucket, drop that in, turn the aerial photograph off, and bring that into the rest of my map. Scoot it up here on top of circulation for right now. Turn everything else off, and I don't need the circulation on right now. Bring my frame, everything else back on, and look what we've got. We've got a layer of information. Now you could also go the opposite direction on this and come in and start to use some layer effects to make those trees pop up. I could add a texture on top of those trees that to make them kind of stand out, and so that they look like trees. Away you go. Relatively simple way to start pulling information forward from an aerial photograph. So those are two drawings, the circulation, the tree cover, that I'd like you to go ahead and take a look at as part of this assignment. There's a couple of others that I would like you to also go ahead and complete. One of those being, as we look at the buildings. I mean, you can match the buildings that I've got on here, but realistically, this was just me taking a quick stab at what I know of each of these buildings. This is just a process of going in and selecting out of the building layer. Again, you got to grab a building at a time. I can come in and grab, different buildings, create a new layer, add features, add a layer effect to them so that we can actually start to separate those out. That's up to you. Take a stab at creating that. And then there's one last layer of information that I would like you to take a stab at. And I'm calling this, just very simply, I'm calling this out as the study area layer. And all the study area layer is intended to do is the study area layer is intended to, how do we bring an aerial photograph into a site diagram without overwhelming the entire image. If I turn on the aerial photograph here, you can see that it's just too much. There's too much information and you lose everyone. So how do we actually start to pull together the right level of information? Well, in my mind, one way to do this is to actually go in and just kind of cut out the area of interest, the part of the diagram where we're actually doing work. One of the things you're going to notice here is I have both my white and my black parcel boundaries on because they're functioning in different roles. So the white's sitting up on top of the black. And so when inside of the aerial photograph, you're going to see the white stand out. Outside of the aerial photograph area, you still see the black lines, right? So these are definitely different approaches to how you show this. The way that I went about creating kind of the squares behind this is I realistically just went ahead and created a simple selection layer using a square brush. So lots of different approaches. I'm curious to see what you all come up with. This has been an exciting tutorial, and I hope you've learned a lot along the way.